You must be joking, right? Bradley Thornton said, flipping the last page of Walter's neatly tabbed budget proposal as if the paper itself had personally insulted his lineage. This stuff, domain name system renewals, registrar fees, secure sockets layer monitoring, it all sounds like organizational fluff to me. It is not exactly core operations, is it? Walter Vance did not blink. He did not flinch, not because the dismissive tone did not sting, but because he had learned long ago that reacting to corporate bullies only gave them the leverage they craved. Men like Bradley did not fire you when you showed emotion. They fired you when you made them feel incompetent. So, Walter sat in the mahogany conference room, his spine straight, his hands folded neatly over his legal pad. Around the table, the junior analysts shifted in their seats, casting quick, nervous glances at each other. The air was thick with the scent of burnt office coffee, cheap plastic chairs, and the slow, inevitable rot of poor management decisions. Bradley spun his leather chair halfway toward the rest of the room, looking for an audience. Let us get real, gentlemen. We are trimming the fat. This company is building the future, and we do not need to keep investing in legacy leftovers. That was his favorite new phrase, legacy leftovers. He was referring to the domain names, the registrar accounts, and the automatic renewal protocols that the entire company stack depended on to function. But Walter said nothing. He was what the veterans called a pre-foundational employee, when the enterprise was just 6 people huddled in a drafty warehouse. With a single cloud sandbox, Walter was the one who stayed up for 48 hours, straight manually stitching the database together. While the founders ran around chasing angel investors like overexcited dogs, Walter was building the actual plumbing. Those early days were fueled by energy drinks, cold pizza, and sheer willpower, and he still carried the digital scars, because nobody else could be bothered with administrative details. Back then, Walter's name and personal email address had ended up as the default administrative contact on almost every vendor account. They told him it was temporary, just a quick fix for a few weeks. That temporary solution had stretched into 7 fiscal years, 3 office relocations, and a workforce of over 200 people. But to Bradley, who had recently arrived from a flashy marketing firm with a title like Director of Operational Acceleration, Walter was practically invisible. He was just part of the office furniture, and Bradley wanted a sleeker, louder office. Bradley turned back to Walter, wearing that sharp, artificial smile common to managers who love winning arguments they do not understand. So, Walter, I have a clear directive from the Finance Committee. Your operations budget has been officially trimmed. A few quiet chuckles rippled through the room. They came from the junior hires who lacked the courage to look Walter in the eye. Walter recognized that nervous laughter. It was the same sound he had heard when they reorganized Margaret in accounting out of her job, and when they moved Harold in security to a basement office and forgot to update his payroll records. Walter wanted to throw his metal pen against the glass wall. Instead, he simply clicked it once, made a small, precise checkmark in the margin of his printout, and nodded. Understood, he said. It was not an act of surrender. It was a digital receipt. Walter Vance did not forget. Later that afternoon, back at his desk in the quiet corner near the humming server cabinet, Walter opened his local budget file. Next to the line item for domain registrar renewals, he typed a brief footnote. Renewal status denied per Director Thornton, flagged as non-core. Then he opened a separate file stored on his personal encrypted drive. This was a spreadsheet he had maintained for years. It was an inventory of infrastructure assets. He sorted the list by owner email. His personal address appeared next to 17 critical assets. 17. These were not minor items. They included the company's primary web domain, the primary domain name system routing tables, the emergency backup servers, the security certificates, and the notification systems. He saved a copy of the file, naming it Infrastructure Legacy Ownership Snapshot. He did not make threats, and he did not throw tantrums. He simply logged the data. Suddenly, a notification popped up on his screen from Human Resources. The message was polite, finished with a cheerful smiley face. It asked him to prepare a quick document summarizing any assets he was responsible for, just to ensure operational continuity for the upcoming quarterly audit. Walter stared at the blinking cursor. He pulled up a blank document and typed a single line. Infrastructure ownership summary per request. Underneath, he wrote a single carefully worded bullet point. Certain early-stage infrastructure assets remain undocumented in the central database due to historical setup processes. Operational renewal responsibilities have been officially denied per the third quarter operations review. He added a reference pointing directly to Bradley's budget denial spreadsheet, then hit save. He did not cause a scene, he simply set the mirror in place, waiting to see if anyone would bother to look into it. He leaned back in his chair, pulled his woolen cardigan tighter against the freezing office air conditioning, and watched the junior staff laugh by the water cooler. He had survived 4 executive transitions, and he knew that when you build the foundation, you are the only one who knows which pillar holds up the roof. The transition was executed with all the grace of a building demolition. Within 2 weeks of the budget review, Walter found himself locked out of the primary infrastructure databases he had designed and maintained. His access level was downgraded to a read-only viewer on the secondary platforms, and his desk was moved even closer to the noisy ventilation shaft. The message was clear: he was being phased out, a slow-motion exit designed to make him quit before they had to pay him severance. But Walter did not quit. Instead, he arrived at his desk every morning at exactly 8 o'clock, hung his coat on the wooden peg, and spent his days compiling records. He was moving past anger into a state of cold, clinical detachment. Walter understood the legal framework of the technology industry far better than Bradley realized. In the early days, when the founders had no corporate credit cards and even less credit history, Walter had paid for the company's primary domain registrations out of his personal bank account. Under California Labor Code, Section 2802, an employer is legally obligated to indemnify an employee for all necessary expenditures or losses incurred by the employee in direct consequence of the discharge of his duties. The company had never fully reimbursed Walter for those early registration fees, treating them as minor expenses that would be resolved during the next funding round. Because no formal transfer agreement had ever been drafted, and because the company had repeatedly failed to clear the outstanding debt, the domain remained, in the eyes of the law, Walter's personal property. Hoping to resolve the matter professionally, Walter drafted a detailed email to Bradley. He copied the Director of Human Resources and the internal audit team. In the message, he listed the 17 infrastructure assets still registered under his personal account, including the primary domain name. He requested a formal reimbursement of the outstanding registrar fees and a signed transfer agreement to migrate the assets to a corporate account. He explained that if the registration expired, the entire application interface and customer database would lose connection to the web. Bradley's response arrived 40 minutes later. It was short, condescending, and typical of a manager who viewed detail as an enemy of speed. "Walter, I appreciate the historical context the email read, but we are moving forward. We need to streamline our vendor relationships. The strategic execution pod is consolidating our accounts. Please focus on cleaning up your local files and let the new team handle operations. We need to stay out of the weeds. There is no need for you to worry about legacy accounts." Walter read the email twice. He did not reply. Instead, he printed 3 physical copies of the message, placing one in his briefcase, one in his personal home file, and one in a secure folder marked Compliance History. He then forwarded the entire email chain, along with the original budget denial spreadsheet, to his personal address. He had fulfilled his duty under California Labor Code Section 2802. He had identified the expense, requested indemnification, and offered to transfer the property. The company, through its authorized director, had refused the budget and told him to stop worrying about the account. The legal trail was clear, documented, and absolute. That evening, Walter sat in a quiet Italian restaurant downtown, meeting his old friend Kenneth, who had left the corporate world 2 years prior to start a consulting firm called Black Box Infrastructure. Over a plate of pasta, Walter explained the situation. "You are telling me they cut your budget for the domain renewals, and they still have not updated the billing info or the administrator contact?" Kenneth asked, shaking his head in disbelief. "Precisely," Walter replied, taking a sip of water. Bradley officially denied the line item and told me to let the new team handle it. Kenneth laughed, a deep, booming sound that drew glances from the adjacent tables. They are running a multi-million-dollar platform on a domain owned by a guy they are actively trying to push out the door. It is like building a skyscraper on a leased piece of dirt and refusing to pay the rent. If that domain expires, their entire system will collapse in minutes. I know, Walter said quietly. I offered to transfer it, but Bradley told me to stay out of the weeds. He said the strategic pod has everything under control. Kenneth's expression turned serious. They do not deserve your loyalty, Walter. You have spent 7 years keeping that place alive. If they want to play games, let them. When the dust settles, you should come work with me. I have 3 clients right now who would pay top dollar for someone who actually knows how to build stable infrastructure. Walter looked out the window at the passing traffic. He felt a sudden, profound sense of relief. The burden of caring for a company that did not care for him was finally gone. He pulled out his personal phone, opened his calendar application, and navigated to a recurring event labeled Domain Renewal Deadline. He tapped the screen twice. The notification vanished. He closed the phone, smiled at his friend, and agreed to review the consulting contract Kenneth had prepared. The countdown had begun, and Walter was no longer holding the clock. The management of the company's critical systems was officially handed over to the Strategic Execution Pod. This team consisted of Brody, the former mortgage salesman, Chloe, the office assistant, and Justin, who believed network security was something that happened automatically when you turned on a laptop. They spent their days renaming folders, creating colorful charts on digital boards, and sending chat messages filled with congratulatory symbols. They were highly visible, very loud, and completely incompetent. Walter watched from his corner desk as they systematically ignored the basic rules of infrastructure maintenance. Chloe once uploaded a confidential client database to an online conversion website just to change a file format, and Brody regularly emailed unsigned software agreements directly to vendors, bypassing the legal department entirely. They seemed to believe that as long as they looked busy on their online channels, the actual code would run itself. Walter knew his time at the firm was coming to an end. His consulting contract with Kenneth was signed, and his departure date was set for the end of the month. It was time to clear his personal assets from the company's ledger. He logged into the primary domain registrar portal, using his personal credentials. He went to the Billing tab and looked at his personal credit card details, which had been stored there for 7 years. He deleted the card from the system. Next, he navigated to the automatic renewal settings. He toggled the automatic renewal switch to off. The registrar dashboard immediately displayed a warning. This domain will expire in 22 days and will be suspended unless a valid payment method is provided. Walter closed the browser tab. He had warned Bradley in writing. He had requested reimbursement. He had been told to stay out of the weeds. He was simply following orders. The first major crack in the foundation appeared on a rainy Wednesday afternoon. The sales department had scheduled a live demonstration with a major logistics conglomerate. A successful demo would secure a multi-year contract worth several $1,000,000. The executive suite was buzzing with excitement, and Bradley was pacing the halls, already calculating his quarterly bonus. 10 minutes into the demonstration, the system crashed. The client interface displayed a series of database resolution errors, and the internal systems went completely dark. The sales representative scrambled to explain the issue, but the screen remained blank. In the engineering section, Gregory was desperately typing commands into his terminal, trying to determine why the servers had suddenly stopped communicating. He looked stressed, his forehead covered in sweat. "What is happening?" Bradley demanded, bursting into the engineering area with a cold cup of coffee in his hand. "Why is the demo offline?" "It is a domain resolution issue," Gregory said, his fingers flying across the keys. "The application interface is not finding the database servers. Something has changed in the routing tables upstream, but I cannot access the registrar portal to verify the settings." Bradley turned his glare toward Walter, who was quietly reviewing a technical manual. "Walter, is this one of your legacy leftover problems?" Walter met Bradley's gaze with calm indifference. As of the third quarter operations directive, domain routing and registrar management are no longer within my scope, Walter said, his voice flat and even. You instructed the strategic pod to consolidate those accounts. Bradley waved his hand dismissively. I do not care about the division of labor right now, Walter. Just fix it. I cannot, Walter replied. I no longer have administrator access to the network directory, and the budget for those external services was denied. I have no authority to call the registrar or make changes. Bradley muttered an insult under his breath, turned back to Gregory, and told him to find a way around the problem. The sales demo was a total failure, and the logistics company postponed further discussions indefinitely. Bradley declared the incident a technical fluke and suggested the team focus on their marketing presentation. That evening, Walter sat at his kitchen table, watching the rain beat against the glass. He opened his personal laptop and drafted an email to David Sade Foster, a seasoned corporate attorney who had advised him on contract matters in the past. David, Walter wrote, if a corporate domain name expires because the director officially denied the renewal budget, and that domain is registered under my personal name and email because the company never reimbursed my initial expenses, can I legally re-register it for my own use after I leave the firm? David's reply arrived the next morning. It was clear and precise. Under California Civil Code Section 3336, the measure of damages for the conversion of personal property requires the plaintiff to establish a right to possession at the time of the alleged conversion. If the corporation actively refused to indemnify your expenditures under California Labor Code Section 2802 and officially documented their decision to deny funding for the renewal, they have abandoned their legal interest in the property. They cannot claim conversion if you re-register the domain, because they voluntarily forfeited their right to maintain it. You are legally clear to let the registration lapse and register it under your new consulting venture. Walter printed the email and placed it in his briefcase. He had the law, the documentation, and the facts on his side. He closed his laptop, poured himself a cup of coffee, and smiled. The storm was coming, and he had built a perfect shelter. The corporate atmosphere shifted from arrogant neglect to sudden, suffocating panic when the pre-acquisition audit began. A major investment firm was conducting due diligence, examining every legal and technical asset to verify the company's valuation before closing the deal. The lead auditor, a veteran investigator named Victoria, sat in the main conference room, reviewing the infrastructure logs with Bradley. The room was littered with empty water bottles, discarded spreadsheets, and the tense energy of a team hiding their own structural failures. Halfway through the review, Victoria stopped scrolling. She pointed to a line on her screen and adjusted her glasses. Mr. Thornton, I see that the primary domain name and 17 critical back-end systems are registered under a personal email address, waltervance@gmail. Who is this individual, and why does he own the core digital properties of this corporation? Bradley cleared his throat, his face flushing red as he adjusted his collar. That is just a legacy naming convention from our early startup days, he lied, waving his hand as if brushing away a fly. We are in the middle of a migration process right now. It is nothing that requires our attention. The strategic execution pod has the files. Is this migration documented? Victoria asked, her voice cool, professional, and entirely unimpressed. We need to see the signed transfer agreements and the budget approvals for these assets to ensure there are no ownership disputes. If the domain is owned by a private individual, the acquisition cannot proceed. Of course, Bradley said, flashing his practiced smile. The strategic execution pod is compiling the final handover package as we speak. You will have it on your desk by the end of the week. The next morning, Walter received a message from the human resources manager. It was another polite request, finished with a cheerful smiley face, asking if he could draft a quick transition memo summarizing his duties before his official departure on Friday. They wanted a simple 2-page summary they could show the auditors to pretend everything was under control. Walter did not write a short memo. Instead, he spent 3 nights at his kitchen table, compiling a comprehensive 72-page manual. He titled it Core Infrastructure Dependencies and Ownership Status. The document was a masterpiece of technical documentation. It included detailed routing diagrams, system maps, billing histories, and server backup logs. Crucially, it also contained copies of every email he had sent to Bradley regarding the domain renewals, alongside the official budget denial spreadsheets stamped with Bradley's initials. He laid out the legal context clearly, citing the requirements of the California Labor Code and the consequences of their refusal to pay. On the final page, Walter wrote a single clear sentence: primary domain registration and network access credentials remain under personal ownership due to the third quarter operations budget freeze. He uploaded the document to the secure human resources portal, closed his laptop, and prepared for his final day. On Friday afternoon, Walter quietly packed his few personal belongings into a cardboard box. He turned in his office keycard, shook Gregory's hand, and walked out of the building. Nobody from the strategic pod came to say goodbye. Bradley was in a closed-door meeting, telling the board how he had successfully streamlined the operations department. Walter drove home, unplugged his work phone, and placed it in a drawer. The collapse occurred on Saturday morning. The company had scheduled a critical weekend onboarding window for 3 major enterprise clients. These were high-value accounts that had demanded complete system stability before signing their final contracts. The sales directors were online, the product managers were monitoring the dashboards, and the engineering team was on standby in their virtual war room. At exactly 9 o'clock in the morning, the system began to fail. The first customer support tickets reported that clients could not reach the login page, receiving host not found errors. By 9:20, the internal application programming interface gateway went completely dark. Gregory sat in the empty office, staring at a screen filled with red error codes, while the corporate chat rooms exploded with panic. "What is going on?" Bradley screamed, running into the engineering bay with his tie half undone. "The board members are calling me every 5 minutes. Why is the platform offline?" "The domain has expired," Gregory said, his voice trembling as he showed his monitor. "The domain name system is not resolving. Every single server is disconnected from the web because the registration lapsed at midnight. We are completely invisible to the internet. Well, log into the registrar and renew it." Bradley barked. "Use the corporate credit card." "We cannot," Gregory replied, throwing his hands up in frustration. "The account is registered under Walter's personal email address. When I try to log in, the portal demands a 2-factor authentication code sent to his personal mobile phone. We do not have the credentials, the recovery email, or the security questions. We are completely locked out, and the system does not recognize our corporate IP addresses." Bradley's face went white. He grabbed Gregory's laptop and stared at the screen. The registration database showed the domain status as expired, pending deletion. The administrative contact was listed as Walter Vance. The man who had been officially trimmed was now the only person who could restore the company's digital existence, and he was nowhere to be found. The crisis worsened by the hour. The 3 enterprise clients, unable to connect to the platform, canceled their integration sessions. By noon, the sales team reported that 2 of the clients had formally withdrawn their contracts, citing concerns over system reliability. The company was facing the loss of several $1,000,000 in projected revenue, and the upcoming acquisition was on the verge of collapse. The war room was silent, filled with the smell of cold food and the heavy weight of panic. Gregory turned to Bradley, rotating his laptop screen. "Bradley, look at this. The registrar database is clear. The domain expired because the payment method was removed. The budget request you denied last month was the exact amount needed to cover these fees." Bradley stared at the screen, his mouth open. His hand shook as he took off his glasses. "Oh no," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Why did nobody tell me it was this critical?" "We did," Gregory said quietly. "Walter flagged it in the operations review, and he wrote a 72-page handover manual explaining the dependencies. You signed the denial form yourself." By Sunday morning, the legal department was fully engaged. Cynthia Hayes, the head of legal, called an emergency board meeting. She sat at the head of the conference table, her expression dark. Beside her sat Beatrice DuPont, the company's oldest board member who had guided the firm through multiple funding rounds. "What is our exposure?" Beatrice asked, her voice calm but sharp. Cynthia opened a folder and distributed copies of Walter's 72-page manual. Our exposure is absolute, Beatrice. Walter Vance paid for these registrations out of his personal account years ago. Under California Labor Code Section 2802, we were legally required to reimburse him. Because we refused to pay the fees and officially denied the budget, we have no legal claim to the domain. Any attempt to seize it would constitute conversion under California Civil Code, Section 3336. Walter is the sole owner. Can we not just buy it back from the registrar? Bradley blurted out, his voice desperate. We can pay a premium. No, Cynthia said flatly. The registrar requires two-factor authentication from Walter's personal phone to release the account. We cannot bypass it. The acquisition is on hold until this is resolved. The investment firm will not purchase a company that does not own its own web address. Beatrice DuPont turned her eyes to Bradley. Mr. Thornton, you signed the directive, calling this critical infrastructure non-core. You also approved the removal of Walter Vance from our operations. Do you have a plan to resolve this? Bradley stammered, looking for support from the strategic pod members in the room, but they remained silent. I will call him, Bradley said. I will offer him his job back. I already tried calling him, Gregory interrupted. He is not answering. We dropped him from our communications list 3 weeks ago. He is gone. While the corporate office crumbled, Walter Vance was sitting in his kitchen, enjoying a cup of hot tea. He opened his personal laptop and looked at his new consulting website. The logo was clean and professional. Vance Infrastructure Consulting. Beneath it, a simple slogan, Building Foundations That Last. His phone buzzed. It was a LinkedIn notification. Gregory had posted a message, a reminder to all startups. Infrastructure is the spine of your business. Never trim the people who hold the keys. Thanks to Walter Vance for keeping the lights on for 7 years when nobody else cared. Walter smiled, clicked like on the post, and closed the application. A few minutes later, his email inbox pinged. It was a message from Cynthia Hayes, requesting an urgent consultation. Walter, the email read, we are experiencing an infrastructure emergency regarding the domain registration. We need your assistance to restore services. The board is prepared to offer you an external consulting contract at a rate of $20,000 per month, with a minimum commitment of 6 months. To manage the transition, Walter read the email, took a sip of tea, and began drafting his response. He did not gloat and he did not show anger. He simply stated his terms. He would help them restore the routing tables. But the transfer of the domain would only occur after the outstanding registration fees from the past 7 years were paid in full, alongside a signing bonus of $50,000. He also required that Bradley Thornton be removed from any operational oversight regarding his work. The board accepted his terms within 30 minutes. Bradley was quietly dismissed from his position by the end of the day, his flashy slogans replaced by the quiet reality of his own failure. Walter returned to the office the following week, not as an employee, but as an independent specialist. He wore his comfortable cardigan, carried his personal laptop, and spent 2 hours restoring the domain name system routing tables. The platform came back online, the database connected, and the acquisition proceeded, though at a lower valuation. As he walked out of the building, Walter looked at the empty office where Bradley used to sit. The strategic execution pod was gone, replaced by experienced engineers who understood the value of documentation. Walter Vance had not burned the house down. He had simply walked out with the keys, and the structure had forgotten how to stand without him.